Good afternoon, Miamians. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. As part of the Alumni Association's webinar series and in collaboration with the Richard and Carole Cox Art Museum, today we present The Past Persists, Memory, Identity, and the Art of Katherine Fries and Ellen Price. Joining us today are the artists Ellen Price and Katherine Fries, as I mentioned. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here. As a reminder for our live viewers, you can submit questions, comments, feedback throughout the webinar today by clicking the Ask a Question button under your video. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Shaman to introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about Katherine and Ellen and get this conversation started. Welcome.
Thanks, Molly. Wonderful to be here. Ellen, Katherine, always great to see you. And thank you again for including your work in the current Faculty and Alumni Exhibition at the Richard and Carole Cox Art Museum. So Ellen Price is a rather distinguished Emerita faculty in the Department of Art who headed up the printmaking program for many, many years. And really helped to establish the success of that program. And we're very fortunate to have in this program together is one of Ellen's former students, who is an alum of Miami University, Katherine Fries, who has been very successful in teaching in Indiana. As well as a very talented contributing artist, and we've actually had your work in several of the faculty and alumni exhibitions over the years. So really excited to hear from both of you more about you and about your work and the intersections that I have come to see in your work and very clearly in conversations with you that you recognize. So, Katherine, if you want to kick things off first.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take just a moment to share my screen. Thank you for your patience. All right, does that look good to you, Jason?
Looks great.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. As mentioned, I'm Katherine Fries, and I'm thrilled and honored to have this time to share with you a little bit about my work. But before I do, I just want to take a moment to thank a few people. First, a big thank you to Jason and Molly for not only the invitation and opportunity, but the assistance that made today possible. And a sincere thank you to Ellen, who I am honored and humbled to have had the privilege to share this time and space with, and to reconnect with about our work, which has been really lovely. Ellen is a part of a personally very important group of faculty, past and present, at Miami that I wish to thank. And I just wanted to put some of their names here because I think education and art has such a beautiful lineage. And as you see through our talk, you're going to see some connection points that I certainly have made between mine and Ellen's work through her tutelage. I earned my MFA from Miami in 2014, and these are just some of the really impactful people who helped shape my time there and continue to influence my artistic practice. And I'm very grateful to them, so I wish to thank and acknowledge that. But today, I spend my life working in the worlds of art and education. I have the privilege of serving as a chair and associate professor at the University of Indianapolis, where I've established the printmaking program known as Hullabaloo Press. To you a little bit about my personal artistic work. That work spans many different disciplines and mediums. I actually started and came to Miami as a painter and continue to paint. It's a big part of my practice and what I have identified as kind of my first love and entry point as an artist. I typically create large-scale figurative works in oil paint. But over the last 12 years and since leaving Miami, I have developed a robust printing practice using a variety of printmaking techniques, including but not limited to paper lithography, relief printing both in wood and linoleum cuts, pressure printing, and letterpress. Additionally, I use collage and assemblage, both three-dimensionally and two-dimensionally, all of which I'm exploring objects, print, layering, and space to create and share my story. Last but not least, and I had to pay this nod because you'll see it in the work, but I consider myself an analog designer. A large part of my practice or extension of my printed work is in letterpress printing, a skill that I was first introduced to at Miami by Erin Beckloff. I would be remiss not to put my educator hat on for just a minute, because I know some of our audience members might not have a familiarity with printmaking. So I thought I'd share just a little bit about what that is and what that might look like to contextualize the work we're going to talk about today. At the most basic or fundamental level, printmaking is really letters and images pressed into paper with ink in between. Now, those letters might be hand-set type or burnt into a silk screen. It might be an image created through a drawing on a lithography plate or carved into linoleum or woodblock. But those same ingredients of some kind of image, some kind of pressure, some kind of and ink or bind or pulls all of these different mediums together into the discipline of printmaking. And these little illustrations, you can see how once an image is inked and pressure applied through a printing press, it transfers that ink from that surface of maybe type or stone or paper or plexi or linoleum onto the surface of the paper. Here I am at Hollow Blue Press printing a letterpress layer on a Vandercook Universal 2. While this is only just scratching the surface of what printing can look like, I hope it helps contextualize some of the work that we're going to discuss today. So now that we have a little bit of understanding about the types of things that I do, I want to dive a little deeper into my practice. And probably the best place to start is the work currently on display at Miami. In some ways, it's kind of where all of these roles, mediums, histories collide. So at the museum until December 13th, you can see these works and the works of Ellen Price and many other faculty and alums in person. But all of these works were created using various printmaking techniques that function as portraits of my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother. These prints are a culmination both in concept and in process of the many things that I explored at my time at Miami and since. What it really boils down to is how I see my role as an artist. For me, those roles are storyteller and preservationist. I wish to tell stories, mine, others, or people closely related to me, through their likeness and the objects they leave behind or curate during the course of their lives. This act of painting, printing, or otherwise crafting space or image from these elements leads me to that role of preservationist. I feel called to save and share these stories, and that call is a primary motivator for the work that I make. The space between objects and people can take on a great weight and can be deeply personal, larger cultural impact. T.S. Eliot said, "It is only in the world of objects that we have time, space, and selves." And I find that to be true in many ways. My work toggles between the historic and the sentimental, the personal and the popular. This series is a perfect example of how I explore these concepts. The 3 images in the exhibition are 3 of 7 prints, honoring the stories and relationships I've had with my mother, my grandmothers, and my great-grandmothers, all manifested from stories and objects that I or my parents own. Each one is a portrait in likeness and in artifact. This intersection of the personal and the physical deeply interests me, and while I often explore many individuals, I find myself time and time again returning to the stories and the people of my own family. This series intentionally took place while I was starting a family of my own and becoming a mother myself. I thought I would share a little bit about the process behind this series to kind of show you how this work takes place, both in the physical sense and the conceptual sense. It all starts with what I can recall or hold in my hands. Growing up, I had 2 very different relationships with my 2 sets of grandparents. I lost one set before I was born or at a very young age, and I primarily learned about them through stories or mementos or belongings that they left behind, many of which existed alongside me in my parents' home. That side of my family also happened to be savers and left a really rich collection of things to give me context to their lives. But in contrast, my other grandparents, I was fortunate to have for the majority of my life up until this point, having only just lost them recently in the last few years. They didn't save or have many mementos or physical things offering to me, but they gave me firsthand accounts and lived our lives side by side. I was drawn to this sense of history these stories and objects offered me from a very early age, and I felt closer to these people knowing them through these things. The stories, photos, and objects are really the raw material for these prints, and really call into view love, loss, legacy, and intimate connection. It's the starting point. After rating my home or that of my parents for any clue or link to that person selected that I want to explore, I turn to the likeness of that person, looking at photographs from when they were young to when we might have lost them, spanning their whole life. The hours spent drawing them, looking at their objects and hearing their stories and assembling the prints create time and space to learn about and in many ways revisit or establish a relationship with them. It also creates this wonderful byproduct of time and space spent with family now. We've had really deep and meaningful conversations because of this investigation. Once I have these drawings, I've photographed other objects or scanned them. I spend time making printing plates, carving linoleum, finding textures I can print, and setting type to craft the print desired. I use, anywhere from between 2 and 8 different types of printmaking in a single work. I build my composition much like I build my relationship with these individuals, exploring the connectivity, the relationship, my viewpoints of them, and any fragments that I can piece together. I spend a great deal of time to create references, moods, and hierarchy. And I often select bold and vibrant colors, allowing the objects and person to feel more fully present, not past, worn, or faded. Then I finally go to press. And while all the planning in the world can take place, this process of printing is unusual. And in almost all of my prints, my letterpress work, my work is monotypes, meaning they're one-of-a-kind prints, where happy accidents can change the trajectory of your work. In many ways, I approach them in that fashion, probably because I started as a painter, and painters spend a great deal of time crafting a singular image and think about it in terms of layering and space and color and light. A lot of that is how I approach printing. But printing provides qualities of images, the ability to layer them, and the fact that I can engage anything from fabric objects to photographs to drawings to written documents in a way that painting could not. So concepts in all the different mediums of my work, this one offered something totally different. And what's really wonderful for me and why I'm excited to share this is because I learned these things at Miami. This process allows me to capture, translate, and orchestrate a memory, part lived and part invented. All of the parts mean something and piece together the story. If we use this print as kind of a case study, you can see examples of things that this grandmother, my grandmother Elsa, had made or worn, things that she had signed, photographs of her likeness. It leads me to think about the alignment of the object interaction and the printing process. Her hands held this or made this. Now mine hold and make the print. We are pressed together through time and layers of image and ink. And these prints almost feel like time capsules, creating tangible legacies in ways a single object cannot. Almost as if they are the montage that plays through your mind as you hold that object or engage that memory of that person. It's my goal that the viewer has potentially 2 types of engagements. One, trying to figure out who this person was and their importance and their things that they can offer us through these objects and images. But 2, finding something kin with the story. The best compliment I probably ever have gotten about my work is that work reminded them of their family and their objects and their stories and their personal connections. There's something universal. While these images are highly specific to my grandmother, what people are in your lives and how have they influenced you and what do you hold on to keep their memory alive? Those are the types of conversations that really interest me. This one, along with this print of my grandmother Hattie, our great-grandmother Hattie, and my great-grandmother Minnie, are some of the prints that you see in the work. at Miami, but they are actually 3 of a larger set of these 7 women. And this set really embodies the process that I just outlined. While this series is one of my most recent, this concept has been a thread through much of my printed work. And I thought I would just cite a few examples since my time at Miami that led me here. A couple years installation of prints. It allowed me to explore the life and path of my maternal grandmother, who had succumbed to dementia. Of print serving as the embodiment of memory felt even more striking at this time in her life. The process of creating these prints was predominantly through paper lithography, and that medium, if they were just the glow in the back of your mind, or sharp, hard, contrasting images that could be vibrant, and almost as if you're reliving or rethinking about those memories of that person. In that way, the process and the abilities of this process allowed me to create this kind of metaphorical space for memory, taking something internal and making it external. While this was highly personal, I also took this to my role as educator. I am an alum of the University of Indianapolis. I got my BFA there, and I worked with then current students to create a very similar style installation, exploring the life, history, and potential future of our university through themes that mattered to our institution and educational mission. This particular piece allowed us to explore similar themes and concepts, but on a broader scale, and now lives in our library. And what's interesting is it's brought several of the same types of conversations about the life of institution as it would with the life of a person. I've also explored the men in my family, including my grandfathers. I've connected with my now hometown of Indianapolis through this process. And I've created works exploring new ways to merge print and object. Some of these same images crafting new prints and new memories and new senses of self. Each time I find something new and see it with new eyes because I'm at a different stage in my life and I see things from that new perspective. All of this really started and took shape in a very real way at Miami. This time where I could look at what I made, how I made it, and those we choose to represent has been profound in my personal life and my creative practice. And while I've spent a great deal of time talking about these interrelated works, I wanted to take my last couple of minutes to share a few works that don't necessarily live in this sphere, but I think are just as important. At the end of the day, my work is in some ways about representation and making visible the things that are unseen. While it might be a family member who passed or memory that's trapped in your mind, it might also be populations that are underrepresented or communities and spaces that might be unseen. One of the things that I noticed as I was looking at the history of letterpress printing is that a lot of the men were uplifted. And so my newest series of paintings are uplifting the women printers of today. And so this is actually of Erin Beckloff, who is a former faculty member and alum of Miami. And then this is another one of Stephanie Carpenter of the Hamilton Wood Type and Printing Museum. In these paintings, I am connecting their physical likeness with tools of their craft, and then in the background, you see elements of their own printed work acting as the backdrop to the work. I'm also a member of the queer community, and so I create work within letterpress to uplift and advocate for this community and think about how my identity is impacted in different ways. To share your experience, your voice, and views is what really matters to me and what allows the power of the press to really be tangible in a very real way. At the end of the day, while I spend a lot of time engaging objects, processes, and memories, it's the people that are truly the pivotal and important part of all of this. If someone didn't care enough to share the memories or tell the stories or teach the processes or save the mementos or take the photo or have the conversation, I often ask, where would we be? Art making to me is about caring enough to make, to share, to tell the stories, and I find this compelling and important. It gives my life purpose, meaning, and grounding. And when I see others' work, I often ask, what did they care enough to share with me? I thank you for this time, and I can't wait to see what Ellen has to share with us. But I want to thank Ellen again for opening my eyes to the possibilities of print that now I pivot around while I create my work.
Katherine, thank you so much. That the work is so poignant, and I love the recent paintings of the letterpress. I will have to get with you separately just to tell you how fantastic I thought your talk was. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
I am so pleased to be both included in the Faculty and Alumni Exhibition at the museum and to be sharing this presentation with Katherine Fries. Many thanks also to Jason Shaman, both for inviting us to speak and for the beautiful and thoughtful job you did curating the Faculty and Alumni Exhibition. I know it's an incredible amount of work, but it's really incredible, really beautiful. I also want to thank Jack Green and all the RCC AM staff for all the efforts they did in putting up the show and everything they did do for the museum and to enrich our community. Also, thank you, Molly Young, for helping us get together and facilitating the talk. Teaching at Miami and working with creative students such as Katherine has been such a privilege. I retired in 2020, and while I do love being retired, nothing quite matches the sense of excitement when students would pull their first prints, or when artists with a more developed body of work, and I would include Katherine in this group, move into printmaking and take their imagery into new directions. But let me get started about my background and my creative work. I'm a printmaker, and while it's a broad field, I've primarily worked with etching and varying types of monotype throughout my career. Originally, I just think I got hooked into printmaking because I just loved the smell of mineral spirits and oil-based ink. If you haven't tried it sometimes, find a print shop and take a deep whiff. The work in the Art Museum is entitled Still, is a monotype. Again, a one-of-a-kind print. The image results from multiple press runs which accumulate marks on the paper. And not to get too technical, but sometimes I'll use parts of old etching plates and, roll ink on them just to kind of build up a richer field of marks. As Katherine explains, most print media creates multiples, but a monotype involves a one-of-a-time application of ink to a surface, which creates the image. Katherine and I both share an interest both in family subject matter as well as this way of making prints, a low-tech monotype version of lithography, paper plate litho. When I have to explain it, I just say it's printmaking magic. For me, the wishbone form invokes a sense of chance. Has everyone had this childhood experience of holding on to a side of a wishbone to see which way it would break? That sense of uncertainty that it could break either way feels like a possible metaphor for me, and that may become clearer through the talk. This particular print grows out of a long-running body of work about my family background. The subject matter comes from early 20th century photographs of my relatives, which were both a catalyst and a source material. So the wishbone print in the museum is somewhat of an outlier because it does not depict a person. Next slide, please. Some background for context. My parents were from two different racial groups. My mother was white, descended from New York Irish immigrants, and my father was African American. When they were married in New York City in 1953, their marriage would have been illegal in over 25 states. In fact, the ban on marriage between people of different races was only struck down in 1967 in the Supreme Court decision Loving versus Virginia. I had to look that up. I did not remember that it was that late. So the photo series is all from my father's family, most of whom lived in North Carolina while we lived in New York City. Now, I'm often asked why I don't do images about my mother's family. I have a simple answer. I have no photographs of her extended family, zero. Her mother died when she was 11. Her father remarried, And I have one blurry picture of her mother. That's it. New slide, please. So possessing this collection of family photographs, many of which dated from the turn of the century or even earlier, inspired me to want to find a way to use them in my artwork. Making artwork that utilized photographs as a primary source was somewhat of a departure for me, but I felt a pull to do something with them. New slide, please. On screen is one of the earliest pieces from this new body of work of photographs. It's entitled This. Now, how I first came to use the partial image of the face is a story that doesn't really put me in the best light. I had this, photograph about 5 inches high, and I was trying to move it around. I was just using a photocopier to enlarge it to try to get, the portrait head. And I kept getting them cut off. And it didn't take me too long before I was really intrigued by the ones that were cut off. Later on, I moved to using a scanner, which was much more accurate, but less prone to trance. New slide, please. This is another example of an early piece entitled Anon. Paper plate litho was a perfect fit for translating the photographs into prints because the plate is a piece of paper. It felt less precious, like I could try different things out. Also, the process, enlarging the original, photocopying the original, inking the original, printing the original, all serve to alter the realism of the original photograph, and the finished print yields a surface that felt more granular and textural, very different from the smoothness of a photograph. Next slide, please. The work on screen is entitled Bodice, and you can really see that sort of almost charcoal drawing textural quality to the surface there. Early on, I was very drawn to the enlargement of a relatively small section of the original photograph. This seemed to me to concentrate a sense of nearness to the subject, despite the separation of place and time. And these early 20th century photos were taken with a type of a large format camera that used a 4x5 negative and created an image with a lot of detail. New slide, please. The image on screen is the original photograph of the last two prints. And again, it's only about 5 inches high, but even taking, the head is 1/2 inch high, you would get a lot of detail when they were blown up. This image I called Anon because it was in this family album, but I've never been able to figure out exactly who the person was. New slide, please. Another visual strategy that developed while I was working with this subject matter was the use of repetition, doubling or using the same image twice within the single print. The repetition accomplished a few things. For one, it increased the scale and the presence of the work, and this image would be about 17 inches high and 25 inches wide. I was also interested in the way that the printing subtly changed the tone or darkness, or even the clarity or obfuscation of the image. New slide, please. In this piece entitled Visage, the subject is of my father's grandmother or my great-grandmother. From the style of clothing, the time period seems to be around the turn of the century, and in fact, the date of 1897 was written on the back of the photo. Now, I would not blame you if you were just now thinking, how old is this woman? Because my father was older when he was born. It's as if our family goes back further in time with fewer generations. I'm always still surprised when I meet people and, their great-grandmother is still alive, but I do. I also thought you might be interested in seeing the source photograph for this image. New slide, please. This is the original photo that I worked from. Again, You know, it's only about 5 or 6 inches high, so it's quite small, but contains a lot of detail. And I thought it was interesting. I was never sure. I finally tracked down, it wasn't my grandmother who wrote on the back of the photos, but a cousin of my father's who would visit and would go through photos. A cousin of my father's, this is getting too complicated, from my father's mother's side would say, okay, who are these people? You know, from my father's father. Anyway, so she wrote Grandma Price, Mrs. Carrie Price, and the photo said 1897. And just doing a little bit of snooping around of Ancestry, it was really interesting to see. I found her death certificate, and it written in big black letters was influenza, and it was 1918. So that was the 1918 influenza epidemic. New slide, please. This work is entitled Slight. I found myself interested in using the negative space, or what you might call the background in the print, as an active part. The space felt sort of weighted, like a pressure against the figure, and this, combined with the cropping and negative space, seemed to emphasize a sense of absence or a feeling of what was missing. At times, the cropping of the head can feel a little awkward or even abrupt. New slide, please. This print is called Part. It also uses that feeling of the empty space kind of waiting on the figure, and almost a slightly awkward sense of cropping, or taking a partial portrait. I was also using the paper plate litho process to create marks in the negative or empty space, and really not creating marks, but allowing the marks that arose out of the process to remain. When I first started working with these, I was very, careful to try to keep the background very clean. But the more I worked on them, the more I got interested in, some of the marks that the process would leave. New slide, please. The individual here was my grandfather's younger brother, William Price, so a great uncle. Again, writing on the back of the photo and using sites like Ancestry gave me a few hints as to who these individuals were. When I first saw Uncle on the back, Uncle William Price, I'm like, well, is that my father's uncle? Is that my whose uncle is this? Again, while I was not really focused on genealogy per se, making artwork based on these family photographs opened up a lineage to me that had been closed by time and loss. That was certainly the case with the next few prints that were based on photographs of my grandfather, whose name was Rhodes, Rhodes, as in Colossus of Rhodes, or Cecil B. Rhodes Price. Next slide, please. My grandfather, Rhodes Price, left North Carolina and relocated to New York City with my grandmother around 1910. He worked first as a chauffeur and later as a railroad porter on trains between New York and Philadelphia. At that time, porters both handled baggage and then worked as waiters on the trains. My grandfather died unexpectedly of a stroke when he was in his mid-50s, and my father was in his early 20s. This print is called Tuxedo. I liked the ambiguity of the tuxedo, which could either be his waiter's uniform or worn by someone at a formal event. New slide, please. Here's another work. This print is entitled Edgecombe, and Edgecombe was the name of the street in Harlem where my grandmother's home was. I knew of my grandfather chiefly from the several framed photographs that hung on the wall in my grandmother's home. So from early in my life, there was a sense of loss or absence that was filled in by a picture in a frame. And it's important to emphasize, I don't start out to make work saying, I want to fill in the sense of loss in my life by making pictures of my grandfather. You really only feel compelled to make them at the time and then look back later and kind of see our motivations more clearly. New slide, please. A different thread that I worked on concurrently with the family-based images is that of plant or growth imagery, and this image is entitled Split. These relate to the wishbone image at the top of the talk as to how a form could function as a metaphor or a surrogate for personal experience. This particular image also uses faint writing, which originated on census forms. So that's a tie-in, a definite tie-in with the family photographs, and you can see that on the print. New slide, please. These works were also paper plate litho. So here's an image of me working on Split in my studio at home. And you can kind of see the writing there. I first obtained a small etching press in the early 90s when a friend of my mother's, old friend of my mother's, was dismantling her studio and gave me hers. It was a very old small press. But then after a few years, I brought myself a larger press. I know some printmakers work in their shops at school, but I really needed an at-home press. So I've been very, very lucky to have a press at home. New slide, please. Here's another example of the plant growth images, and this one is entitled Flare. For years, I viewed these two bodies of work, the family photographs, which were chiefly monochromatic, with these other plant-based images as two completely separate bodies. Although while recently putting a different talk together, I had a sort of aha moment when I realized how overlapping or connecting these two subject matters actually are. My ongoing reality is that who I am, or who I know myself to be, is sometimes often different than how I'm perceived. And this dislocation of identity is a subtext in much of my creative work. While the narrative itself may not be very direct or readily accessible, looking back, I see that often my artwork shares an atmosphere of fragmentation and loss. Certainly the drive to create and exhibit these images was in part to open up a chance for dialogue about my family background. New slide, please. I'll conclude by circling back to the work in the Art Museum exhibition and by sharing an artist statement that I wrote about the family series several years ago. So here I am quoting myself. I wrote, "The portrait series serves to locate my identity and acknowledge the imperceptible pull which the past exerts on the present. The partial or cropped view reflects an incomplete knowledge of the subjects, many who share my same last name. There is at once a desire to connect and understand, and at the same time, an acknowledgement of what I can never know. The relocation of my relative's image from the private sphere of a family album to the public sphere of a gallery wall echoes in the space between what is public and private, known and unknown. As an individual whose African-American descent is not obvious, the space between what is revealed and what is hidden is familiar psychic territory." Thank you so much to the audience for listening to our talk today. I know we're going to go on and have questions and answers with Jason. So I'll just wrap it up there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ellen and Catherine. That's absolutely wonderful. And it's very clear for both of you how important it is to discover more of your roots and to keep those connections, but also the discoveries that you made about the people in your family and how they have come to shape you. So thank you so much for sharing that. It was quite emotional hearing it. So before I forget, though, I just did want to mention to everyone that, please come and see these works. See them in person. I mean, images on the screen and the images Ellen and Catherine have provided are beautiful, but nothing really compares to real work.
Yeah.
So please come in. The exhibition is up through Saturday, December 13th. So you still have time
Okay.
to come in, and I really encourage and to see the other faculty and alumni work in the exhibition. But Ellen's and Catherine's are in the second gallery devoted to this work. But both of you describe creating artwork as a response to a sense of loss or absence. How does your artwork create connections to your past? I know you've discussed, but didn't know if there was some additional aspect you'd like to share. Whoever wants to go first. Catherine, you perhaps look like.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that, and Ellen and I kind of discussed this, is, and it comes kind of from a naive place. When you're a child and you are engaging with photos and stories, oftentimes they're the ones that are the happy ones or the preferred ones, or the ones sharing a really lovely moment. And so there's kind of an editing process that occurs. And so a lot of the things I engage with very rarely feel of loss, because it was the connection point. It was the point of presence for me. And it wasn't until later that I started reflecting on it and seeing it and experiencing loss that I was making, that I understood how it was connected and how different people have different entry points into the life timeline of someone. And so I think there are distinctions made between those we know and those we don't, and how that work maybe handles them differently, that I wasn't aware when it first kind of manifested, but have since been aware of.
Yeah, I mean, the word loss, it's lost and found belong together, I think. I couldn't quite work it into my talk, but there's a quote by the poet W.H. Auden that says, "That which is not made into art is lost." And for me, I think it was a sense of discovering and remembering. And, again, partly because, some of it was my grandmother's family, but a lot of it was my grandfather's family. And, he died long before I was born. They all lived far away. I hadn't, I meet people out here, they have family reunions. There's 200 people there, So there's also that very American experience of moving across the country and having a whole, it has a lot to do with place and where you are too, and who's around. But yeah, for me, it was really a finding and a discovering. And Catherine and I were talking about this. There's something about taking that photograph and bringing it to life, either through drawing or through cropping it and printing it. It's as if, I don't want to sound, it's as if they're alive again, kind of. They're seen, they're thought about,
And in your work, and both of you, your family and family relationships are explored through the use of images, but you include other elements like jewelry, Catherine, that you had. Ellen, you also were focusing often on the images,
Right.
aspects of the clothing.
Right.
What prompts you to make those decisions to include or to focus on those?
Well, I think that's so personal to people, though, don't you? I mean, when you meet someone and remember them, like I remember the house dresses my mother would wear and her winter coats, and you know what I mean? Like that's kind of part of the person, or my father's cigarette lighter, or you know what I mean? I may not make prints specifically about that, but it's very much a part of memory, I think, those objects.
Yeah. I sometimes think of objects as the only true time traveler, right? Like the fact that 5 different generations could use or wear an object is really fascinating to me. And thinking about all the hands that touch that. And even in like letterpress printing, how many hands held that press or that type or those things. And so I think a lot about our connection with objects. And I think that both in practice and concept leads me down different avenues. But the other thing that I see happen often with my personal section, which is incredibly personal, right? Like, oh, this personal object belonged to this person of significance to me. A lot of them, are indicative of things that are similar or just like other people's experiences or objects. And so sometimes something will be in my work and it feels oddly specific to me, but then someone else will see it and had something very similar. And so it will conjure a memory for them and prompt a conversation that we have together about those objects. So I think it's for me, it's an entry point of like, okay, how can I connect with this person? And then what are the potentialities of that object?
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think it's important how we make associations with objects and people or periods of time or maybe multiple people associated. And I found very interesting, again, that you both were focusing on aspects of objects that were often adorned. And part of the physical presence that was captured in images. And, thinking about the relationships that people have made, to what extent do you both find that your artwork can create conversations with the viewers of your work about their own family histories and relationships?
Katherine, you start.
All right. I think because I'm very transparent that a lot of this work is about my family. I think the entry point of conversations and probably the best and most robust conversations I've had start with mine and start with my work, but often and pretty quickly turn to theirs. And that's what I said is really a compliment, because I remember as an undergraduate, someone said, well, why and what do you want to make artwork about? And that question is always in my mind. And I've made a conscious decision to engage these personal fascinations with stories through objects, to spend the time making work about people I care about in some way, shape, or form, an answer to that question. And so for them to talk about the things and people they care about feels an extension of that work.
Well, I feel like I'm the selfish outlier here, because I really started this work because, if I could say this without sounding too crabby or something, I understand it, but I was a little tired of people saying to me, what do you mean your father's, what? Like they just couldn't wrap their head that I could be Black, that my family could be Black, And part of that is people not understanding the kind of cultural history of how race is defined, how the one drop rule, or and attitudes have changed, actually. I mean, it's very much a 19th and 20th century definition, a legal definition, that anyone with any African American ancestry at all. So I started out really selfishly to talk about myself, but it's been so interesting to me how many people have said, oh, this in my family, and I've got so-and-so was Mexican. And I mean, somebody came up to me and said, yeah, I have Black relatives too. And nobody really talks about that in my family, that my blah, 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 And it's been a really interesting, and it's just been a really interesting point of conversation. And the things that we think are so unique to us are in part of everyone else's life,
This was really interesting seeing your work, because, Ellen, you said that previously your work dealt more with the person and an image, whereas the work that you have in the show now doesn't. But what originally caught my attention were the patterns that were running down that looked almost like something genetics. And that's what, originally drew my parallels between your two works because Catherine is showing her ancestry.
Mhm.
And I felt in similar ways you were too. And plus, I also know your existing work.
Right.
So I was
Right.
able to make those. But the way you two approached it differently really resonated with me because people think about their family connections in different ways. And as you brought up, Ellen, about your father being Black, that you look at it perhaps in some ways differently, how your genetics
Right.
and how you're related. And I think it's really a wonderful opportunity that I really hope as people are looking at the works that they're thinking about their own backgrounds
Right.
and
That's right.
saying, like, yeah, I remember family photos, or I remember people talking about how I'm related to whom. There's a lot of talk these days about people doing genetic testing to figure out their
Yes.
ancestry. And that's what I think in a lot of ways makes your work has this historical character to it, but also makes it very relevant today. And I really appreciate that,
Okay.
how you both approached it. Do you, and kind of talking also about process, in this way, because your
Yeah.
processes are different than lithography or etching and
Right.
engraving. And, some people might, as you said, be aware of monotypes, but what is it about your process that you're engaging today that you're finding so rewarding?
Mm.
Well, printmaking is for art is a subculture. Printmaking is a subculture. And then within printmaking, you have subcultures within printmaking.
Yes.
It's right, Catherine.
Yes.
And when I run into people who use, paper, they get real excited about it.
Mhm.
Paper plate. Oh, you do paper plate litho too?
Mm,
And the quality of the photocopy, you need that
Mhm.
heat fused toner so that when
Mhm.
it's damp and you roll the ink across it, there's a excitement about, is the ink
Mhm.
catching? Is it rolling up?
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
we
It's
didn't
a
want to talk too much process because we could really nerd out, left to our own devices.
yes. I
Yeah.
did write down though, Ellen, that you called it printmaking magic, and that couldn't be more in sync with how I feel about it. While at Miami getting my MFA, there was like this image or type of image I had in my mind that I just needed to make, and I kept trying it in all these different types of medium, types of printmaking, types of paint, and I just couldn't get it. And then when Ellen showed me this process, it was like light shone from above
Mm,
because it offered this material voice of what
Right.
I needed to make the images I knew I wanted to make. And there's real power in that and real excitement around that. And the process itself is nuanced and finicky, and it forces you to make improvisational choices, at least for me, in
Right.
ways that other disciplines or other mediums didn't. And it's the concert of those different mediums for me working together side by side that allow me to kind of have the chorus of the different things I want to say as an artist. But this was that like missing piece. I just needed
Well,
it between that and letterpress. That changed the trajectory of my work significantly.
and I have to say, Catherine came into the program with a very developed sense of painting and portraiture and these kind of complex portrait setups. And I felt a little bit like I was stealing her away from painting, luring her into the print shop with but yeah, I mean, different media can open up different sort of avenues of
Mhm.
different visual language, different contexts, different, I mean, yeah, Yeah. I mean, for me, it really broke down the photograph and created, I don't know. Well, Jason, you know what a mezzotint is, kind of more of almost like a mezzotint surface, that sort of granular, pebbly sort of, yeah, we can really nerd out about process.
Well,
But yeah.
no, thank you both for that. I just want to, a little time, Molly. Are there any questions from our viewers?
Actually, you did a really nice job of sort of encompassing some of these questions into your line of questioning. And Katherine, you actually touched on one of the questions that that came in about sort of how does the unpredictability of printmaking sort of influence the creativity that come or the finished product of what you're doing, because you said it doesn't take much to sort of make your vision different.
Yeah, well, I think part of it is just working within constraints, and every discipline and medium has constraints, but these feel very different compared to painting in terms of how painting, you can let it dry, paint over it, move on. This, it's there. And some of the prints that I showed you have maybe 30 runs or layers through the press. And so if one goes away, you've got to pivot to see if you're going to salvage that print. And sometimes it's led me down pathways that have been really fruitful because I didn't plan it, but it came out with this result, and it's taken me down a rabbit's hole of possibility. And that challenge as an artist is really exciting, and it keeps you, I think, nimble and always thinking about how you can improve and rethink your work.
Excellent. Well, in the interest of time, because it's 12:57, and I know, Katherine, you're off to teach a class very soon. But I did want to say that we had a comment also come in from Amy. She says, thank you both. She loves your work, and the talks were wonderful. So really, thank you so much for being here, for joining us today. Although they're not your prints, I have prints hanging on my wall at home. So you have inspired me to come looking for your stuff to see if there's anything else I need to hang on my wall. So thank you so much for joining us and for being here and sharing your work. It's beautiful and it's thoughtful, and I think it makes us all sort of think about the things, the feelings, the vibes that get passed down to us. So thank you for sharing all of that. As a reminder to our viewers, you can catch a recording of this webinar later today. It will be available on our website at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. Give it a couple hours. And of course, another quick reminder / shameless plug, you can see Ellen and Katherine's work and that of many others in the Department of Art Faculty and Alumni Exhibition now through December 13th at the Richard and Carole Cox Art Museum right here on campus. Thank you all for joining us. Love and honor to you.
Thank you.
And have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Molly.
Bye.
Ellen, Katherine, fantastic.